Presents. We're here live this afternoon at Anderson Law Firm, and we're going to do something a little bit different this afternoon. Instead of talking about estate planning, we're going to have a segment with our very own Gail Anderson for Gardening with Gail. So stay tuned for some gardening tips with Gail. Here she is.
Thank you, Malin. The things moms will do for their sons. Anyway, what this segment is going to deal with primarily is gardening in the winter landscape. We all would like some color in our winter gardens, and so hopefully we will learn how to get some of that today. The second part of this will deal with preparation for spring gardening. Winter daphne, which is seen here, is one of the more spectacular winter flowering plants. It boasts a strong exotic smell as well, so be sure if you have it to plant it near an entryway so that you and your visitors can't miss the fragrance. This is my all-time favorite plant, I think, and it is, of course, the camellia. I should note that I took these pictures a couple of weeks ago after the very cold spell that we had and before the 2 weeks of warm weather. Most things at that point were hurting from the cold, which is why I went through my yard looking for bright spots. Now the camellias are full of beautiful blooms, much more so than in this picture. Years ago, I lived in a house that had 3 camellias planted beneath the double windows in the dining room. During that same period of time, I attended a Christmas party at the home of a gardening lover who wove camellias into her Christmas wreath on the front door. My love of camellias was guaranteed from that point on. Camellias have a long season, beginning with buds in December and flowers lasting all the way through March. I use the glossy green foliage and the buds and the blooms in my house for that whole time period. In my opinion, they are a necessary addition to any garden. Moving on to 2 more evergreens, and I should stop and just say that evergreens are the backbone of any landscape, and you should remember that when you choose plants for your yard, that the plants that are deciduous look great when they are have their foliage and when they're in bloom, but they cannot look so great through the winter time. So it's great to have all kinds of evergreens in your yard. Mahonia, which is the first picture here, may not immediately come to mind as a plant that lends color, but the bright yellow flowers are eye-catching at this time of the year. The flowers will give way to purple berries that are attractive as well, and of course they feed the birds. Mahonias are not popular with some because the birds do scatter the seed, and therefore the species has been considered invasive. Newer varieties exist that are not as invasive or as prickly, but I don't mind feeding the birds, so I like them scattered in my yard. Flowering quince, which is the second picture here, also comes in pink and peach varieties. It's an old-fashioned plant with winter blooms. The large fruits that develop on them have been used for making jam. This next slide shows 2 of my favorite winter plants, hellebores on the left and heather on the right. Hellebores, or Lenten rose, is really a delight in the yard. Mine start blooming in February, and they have the added bonus of producing many seeds, and so a small patch will quickly spread to become a nice plot of hellebores for you. Heather is another favorite because, and it begins blooming in December. The blooms last for a couple of months. They form nice rounded little shrubs that are evergreen. I have a border of them along my kitchen garden at the back door. The next 2 plants here are winter jasmine and Carolina jasmine. These 2 plants I placed together mostly for my own convenience. I actually do have them together in my yard. The first winter jasmine is often confused with forsythia, though it is not as large or as colorful as forsythia. The buds begin in January, and I like to cut the longer branches and bring them into the house for a breath of sunshine in the winter. I consequently deplete them in the yard, and as you can probably tell from here, I really need to cut them back to get them thicker. The second picture shows buds on the Carolina jasmine, which actually do come pretty early, but they're not showy. So it's really not a good winter plant, but I wanted to put the two together to kind of cement them in your yard as both being jasmines. The next plant that I have here is euphorbia. This was my first year of having euphorbia, and I only got it because I found it on a good sale. But I was really impressed this winter with how red the leaves turned, and I used them very successfully in winter flower arrangements. The leaves turned various degrees of red, and as I cut them, though, I discovered that they have a milky sap. First time it didn't bother me, second time it did. So if you do have euphorbia, you need to be mindful that the sap can cause an allergic reaction in some people. I learned, consequently, that it's in the same family as poinsettias. The redness on the leaves has disappeared since the warm weather has returned. They have greened up quite nicely. And I am very pleased with the shrub-like character that they develop. And so I have the idea of using more of them and forming a small border of euphorbias at some point. The next slide shows bulbs, of course. Bulbs, here's a hyacinth and a group of narcissus. What joy they bring when they first break through in late winter, announcing that spring is on its way. And I'd also like to say that I have omitted discussing hollies and nandinas, not because I don't like them. We could probably have a whole discussion especially just on hollies, but they are more common, and therefore I did not include them in this discussion. And of course, this list is not complete. There are many more plants that can be had to add interest in the winter landscape. Moving on to another discussion about planting garden beds for the spring. And this is kind of a lazy man's way of forming a garden bed. I read about it in the newspaper several years ago, and got to work and did my first lasagna bed. This is one of the simplest schemes that I found online. It is more complicated than what I personally have done. The overall idea is pretty simple. You want to put down a layer of newspaper, and I would say 4 to 6 sheets of newspaper or cardboard. The purpose of the newspaper and or cardboard is to kill the grass or the weeds that may be underneath it. These materials will allow water to flow through, so you're not cutting water off from what's beneath, and they also will decay and add to the bed by decaying. Then you want to add layers of organic material, and this is where the lasagna idea comes in, and you can do it as perfectly or as imperfectly as you would like to do it. The organic material will rot, add nutrients to the soil, and attract earthworms to the site. Earthworms are the magic ingredient. These industrious little guys will mix everything up for you. So you do not have to add any labor to it. The earthworms will do it. So you can add straw, rotted leaves, grass clippings, compost, mulch, topsoil, etc. The first time I did this, it was suggested to add dog food, because dog food will rot and attract the earthworms. Let's just say I wouldn't recommend the dog food. unless you don't have any dogs in your neighborhood. Funny how dogs won't eat the food you put in their bowls, but they will dig up anything they can find outside. But I digress. This particular scheme has the layers up to 3 feet high. That seems a little crazy, but go for it if you want. At the most, my piles have been a foot high. It will take about 6 weeks to kill the weeds and soften the ground, so get started on your new bed. Here's a quick to-do list for February. Prune roses I have here first. Thankfully, I have accomplished that task already this year. I don't always get it done in February, but roses should be pruned before they start putting forth their first growth in the spring. And the second thing I have is don't prune anything else. And I pretty much mean that. I was surprised in reading for this presentation about almost everything I said February is a great month to prune. I have done that in the fall, or I'm sorry, in the early spring. But when I have done it, those late cold snaps that we get, and we usually get 1 or 2 or 3 in March and sometimes in April, those late cold snaps will nip the new growth in the bud, and the plant will look very ugly for quite a while. By all means, overgrown hollies, privets, or similar plants can be pruned, and dead wood on any plant can be cut out. But boxwoods, gardenias, etc., can be hurt by an early pruning. I almost killed some gardenias last year, or 2 years ago, by pruning them too early. Of course, any early flowering plants, such as azaleas and later on hydrangeas, will not bloom if pruned now because you're cutting off the flower buds. An easy generalization for flowering plants is to prune after they flower. Cut back liriope, or liriope, however you pronounce monkey grass. To not do so now or earlier will interfere with the new growth when it comes. I have a lot of liriope in my yard, and it's quite a task, but this is the time to do it. And then the third thing I have here is to apply pre-emergent weed killer to lawns. So necessary to prevent crabgrass and other weeds in our lawns. However, it is a pre-emergent, which means it prevents seeds from germinating. And yes, if it will prevent a weed seed from germinating, it will also prevent grass seed from germinating. So if you are interested in seeding your lawn now or later, this is not the time to apply a pre-emergent to your yard. And then my final thoughts, and these mostly fun thoughts. The first is Rose Study Day at Roses Unlimited in Lawrence. If you've never been to Roses Unlimited, you really ought to try to get there. They have a vast inventory of roses, but check before you go because they're not open every day. Rose Study Day is quite a treat because you go and you learn about roses all day. You have a delicious lunch, and it's just like a rose retreat. Rose heaven among rose-minded people. And again, you can get the details by looking online. What makes this place unique is that 2 friends years ago got into propagating roses from roots rather than by grafting roses onto stock, which is the way that it is normally done. Many people consider the production of roses in this way as being superior to grafting them on stock. But again, it's just it's a place you should know about. It's local, relatively, and pretty unique. And again, the Rose Study Day is just a wonderful day to get away and just be with roses all day. The native plant sale is also a treat. It is extremely well organized. Prices are good. And native plants are the easiest ones to grow because they are native in our area, so they adapt very well. But do plan to arrive early and bring containers for your plants. And though it may be obvious, I end with a reminder of our last day of possible frost. 3 or 4 years ago, we did have a frost on April the 15th, Easter Sunday, as I remember. The weather is so inviting right now. The planting hormones are rushing through our veins. But don't plant annuals or seeds that could be killed by a frost. Anything else you can plant. It's a great time to plant trees or shrubs. It's also a good time to divide plants like daylilies and hostas when they come up later. You can plant seeds indoors. But outside, remember to wait for April 15th. I'd be happy to learn your garden tips, so send them along and we'll share them. And thank you for listening today.
Thank you, Gail. Those were some very interesting gardening tips, especially the lasagna gardening. I haven't heard of that before, so I'm definitely going to try that out this year and leave the dog food out because I would definitely be without a flower bed with my 3 dogs at my house. But anyways, join us next week. We'll be back to our regularly scheduled programming of Dave Ramsey is a Lousy Estate Planner. So have a great night. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to Alf Presents. We're here live this afternoon at Anderson Law Firm, and we're going to do something a little bit different this afternoon.